What is up, everyone? Today we're going to be doing another video in my series, Mastering Observables one operator at a time. And just to do a little bit of self-promotion real quick, you can find this article on www.fullheapdeveloper.com. I'm going to have the link in the description. Please check out some of my other videos. Really appreciate it. So let's jump into it today. We are talking about the tap/do operator. And a lot of people are going to land here from the Angular documentation because they mention the tap operator, but don't actually describe it too well, in my opinion. So I hope I can clear some of that up for you that are landing here from there. And I say tap/do because they are aliases of each other. If you look at the RxJS documentation, which I have up here on screen, you'll see that this is the documentation for tap, but it's actually using do in the examples, right? So import tap, but then it uses do in the documentation, which is extremely confusing if you didn't know they were aliases of each other. The reason being for there being two functions that do the same thing is that do is a keyword in JavaScript, which means it couldn't be used as a function name unless it was on an object already. So like old, let's get rid of this real quick just so you can see. So we have an observable and you would say do on it, and this is historically how you use the RxJS library is functions on the prototype of the observable object. Today is a little different. They've moved into more of a modular way of doing things, so what they're called is lettable operators, but it really just means that their functions are now first-class citizens. So you would do things like do, and you could set that equal to like a function, test do equals. But you can see that this wouldn't work because do is a keyword and therefore can't be used as a function name. So they had to rename it to tap. And if I import that, you can see that it comes from the RxJS library. So that's the reasoning why there's two names for the same thing. So let's walk in on how to use it real quick. A lot of the documentation out there on this is going to tell you that it's good for logging things. And while that may be true, there's more use cases for it. And I'll go into that here in a second. So all up on the screen, I have an array of people. And the first one is just an array of people with a name and a title. So there's me, I'm a developer. There's Francis Underwood, he is the president, and Michael Scott, he is our regional manager. Great. And all I'm doing is creating an observable. I'm using TypeScript for anyone that's unfamiliar with this. This is what this colon means. It means that people $ is of type observable. I'm just doing that to hopefully help you see how types work with RxJS. So you can see like what each object is of. I think that's helpful for me. If it's not helpful, I'm sorry. So people is just equal to, we're creating an observable, and then you can see that we next our first two values, so we're getting the title from each one of these. So we're going to get dev and president, and then we're throwing an error, and then we're completing. So if you subscribe to this, let's see what we would get. Subscribe, let's just do that, and then log our values. Value. So if you do this, let's shrink this down so we can get them side by side. You'll see that our first value is dev and the second one is president, and then we get an error. Great. That's what I expected. So where does tap fall into play? So you could do this, .let, and we have to import let. And these are our lettable operators, tap. I'm just going to do it. I'm going to talk about it. So hold on tight, guys. Value and import tap. So const tapped observable. So if I subscribe to the tapped observable like this, you'll now see that we're going to get two logs. One because we subscribed to it and logged it, and one from the tap. And you also notice that the tap is coming first, value from tap. Save it. So tap is always coming first, value from tap, value from tap. And the reason this is useful, actually very useful, is that as like a library author, you have control over the observable you're handing to a user, but you don't necessarily have control over how they use it, meaning how they subscribe to it, right? So if your goal was to maybe like send an AJAX request anytime a value is passed in, you wouldn't be able to do that if you had to rely on the user to do that for you, right? So you could tap into your observable and send an AJAX request anytime someone had a subscription to it, which is very powerful. A lot of people will say, well, why don't you just keep even if you're just a user of a library, why wouldn't you just put the value, log the value here instead of doing a tap like the Angular documentation does? So the answer to that is tap is far more semantic than if you just put the logic in your subscription. And what I mean by that is you know that the things in the tap operator are not doing logic that modify the source observable at all. I know a lot of people think of like, well, I always use map because I have to iterate over each of the values in my observable sequence. And why would I just do the logic there? Again, tap is more semantic. You know that the logic in there is not affecting your source. And that's extremely valuable, especially when your functions get really large. Let's say, I'm going to go back to Angular because it's what I know, and I know a lot of people use it out there. So I know their router is an observable, right? And you subscribe to like when a route changes. And maybe you need to have a loader icon show when a route is changing, and then the loader icon needs to go away when your route's finished. So you would tap into that observable and then do your changing logic there. If you did it inside of map, you wouldn't ever be sure, if you were debugging it in the future, that the things that were happening in tap weren't modifying the source. And what I mean by that is like, I can't do this, guys. I can't say value plus testing. It's not going to do anything to my values. It's just not. And if you were using map, so let's use map instead. Let's import it. You'll see that map overrode the values because I'm actually doing something to the source observable, and then the subscription gets that value. And that's really unfortunate. So if you put all your logic in here, you can never be sure that it's not modifying the source unless you read it. And saving that mental energy is really valuable to me. So anytime I see logic in tap, I know it's not modifying my source. I don't have to look at it when I'm debugging. And that's the big use case for it in my mind. Let's do an example of do, and we'll call it quits. So let's say, I'm just going to get rid of this and start over. So we would say people.do. We have to import it. And same sort of logic, right? We're just going to log the value for now. Oop. Oop. Got to subscribe or nothing happens, guys. So that's how you use do. The only difference was that do was on the people object. It's on the prototype. Whereas if you remember, tap was used like this. It was people.let. Oop, that didn't work for me. People.let, and then we had tap here. And it was the same sort of logic like this. Value So it looked just like that. So that's the difference. Do is right on the object of people, of the people observable. In this case, tap is just used as a function. So you could have done this. You could have said like tap function equals tap, and actually just copy and paste. You could have said this, and then instead of saying tap here without your logic, you could have said tap function. That would have worked too. Just to prove it, let's subscribe to it. Get rid of this description up here so you know it's not coming from there. Save it. And right there, we still get Devin President. So that's the value of these lettable operators, is that they can be assigned to functions that may make more sense to you. In this case, like if we were going back to the example I gave with the router, you could have been like update is loading, and that makes far more sense, right? If you were updating a loader based on the route. And that's the big advantage over these lettable operators like tap, as opposed to using do, which is right on the prototype. Well, that's it, guys. If you have any questions, please go to my website. There's a contact form here. Fill it out. Send it up to me. You're not required to leave your first name, your last name, or your email. I want this to be anonymous if you wanted it to be. But please leave your email and your name if you want me to be able to respond to you. That's it, guys. Have a great day.